Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. Um, my guest on today's podcast is a married couple, Jeff and Sarah Case. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We're happy to be here.
Jeff and Sarah are married. They're active LDS. They have 3 children. Jeff was on an earlier podcast because of his clinical training and expertise talking about how to help people that are suicidal. It was a very helpful podcast, and we wanted to have Jeff and Sarah back on the podcast to share their story. They're in a mixed orientation marriage. Jeff identifies as gay, Sarah identifies as straight. And we've had some podcasts of couples in mixed orientation marriages, and I think it's just wonderful to hear these stories. These stories help me and give vision and perspective to our younger listeners that are trying to figure out their road in life. So thank you for the courage of coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I think your work is fantastic.
Thank you, Jeff. So let's just start with you, Jeff, a little bit. When did you become aware of your sexual orientation? And did you take on the label as gay or same-sex attraction? Just kind of walk our listeners through your journey in that space.
Yeah, and thanks for calling it a journey, because it really is a process of understanding. So as a child, the understanding was very fragmented and primitive. I think we don't identify necessarily as sexual creatures in childhood, but I did know that I was different. I did know that I craved male connection, and I really was not terribly interested in connecting with females. And I didn't know what that meant. That's just sort of boys will be boys, perhaps. And that felt sort of normal, but I did have experiences where it did seem to not be quite so normal. I felt kind of disconnected. At the same time, like efforts to become connected were thwarted, and again, I didn't really understand what that was until puberty, when people start engaging in more sexual talk, and they start. I recall my friend getting one of his dad's Playboy magazines or something, and flipping through it, and just it wasn't interesting. It wasn't exciting. Every so often, a guy would be on the page, and I'm like, oh, hold on, slow down, right?
It's
I couldn't
honest.
say that out loud. So I was recognizing that
It's honest.
that what I was looking at, I didn't have the same reaction to other kids, right? But the term gay, growing up as an Air Force brat, there wasn't much discussion of LGBTQ issues.
And you're in an active LDS family growing up.
Correct. So very conservative. There wasn't really much discussion. There wasn't really anything being talked about by church leaders. So I was in my head just thinking, just kind of making stuff up. Like for example, I didn't have crushes on guys. I was just drawn to them, and I wanted to be their close, super close, tight, intimate friend. But I didn't really have, again, there wasn't a vocabulary for it until I was 18 years old. And that was the first time somebody asked me if I was gay. And all of a sudden, in that moment, I looked back over all these disconnected, disjointed experiences and understandings, and they sort of coalesced into the idea, yes,
Wow.
I'm gay. And I didn't tell him. That was too scary still. I denied being gay, but I wanted to hear about his experience because he was gay. So I'm really good at making it about other people. So I just let him share his story. But at that point, I'm like, well, what do I do with this? How do I proceed?
Where was your emotional health as you were coming to terms that you're really gay?
Well, I had spent a lot of years on the outside looking in socially, especially as a kid. I wasn't very athletic. There were some sports that I could do, but I really wasn't able to participate in a lot of ways with other guys. So I felt like an outsider in a lot of ways. I was bullied pretty heavily through elementary school and into early junior high years. So I really didn't feel like I belonged. My dad was reassigned from northern Maine to Kansas when I started 8th grade, and I decided I was kind of done getting beat up all the time. So I created a new person, a new facade. And in 8th grade, I kind of tried it out, kind of observed what people do to be accepted. And by 9th grade, I was implementing my plan to be accepted. And I think I did a pretty good job. And of just sort of being this person who would be a part of the group instead of separate. But that I had that nagging sensation of, but you're gay. So as I became I would say emotionally healthy was not great younger, through high school, I became very stable and very happy
Good.
and very content. But then there was that fear. If people find out that you're gay, everything you've built up will crumble around you, and you will be rejected, and you'll be back to seventh grade version of Jeff.
And one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this podcast, and I think our listeners, is both of you sharing your story, but that with your clinical expertise. And so you're walking this path as a gay Latter-day Saint in a mixed orientation marriage, and you're also have this wonderful clinical expertise that brings concept and other understanding to the road you're individually walking, and then I think an increased ability to help others, no matter what road they're walking. And I think some of those tools you developed being bullied then put you in a better spot emotionally long term, maybe, or at least in a better spot coping, so you're okay emotionally.
Yeah, I think so. I think those early experiences taught me a lot, and though they were difficult, I had a great family around me, loving parents. I had a mother who taught me empathy, even for my bullies. I would say, "Mom, you wouldn't believe what this kid told me today," and I would tell her, and she said, "That's a really grown-up thing to say. I wonder if his dad says that to him."
Wow.
And that's where he learned those words. And I'm like, great. Now I feel sorry for my bully, right? So I was given kind of from her nurturing, given the opportunity to be very forgiving. And it doesn't make any sense for, I'm 44. It doesn't make any sense for me as a 44-year-old to be angry at a 10-year-old version of somebody.
That's good.
So that I've been able to work through that.
So you served a mission to Florida. Did
Correct.
You come out to anybody before your mission or during your mission?
I did not. I was, like I said, there wasn't really much of a place to talk about it. The church really hadn't issued much to say. The stuff written in like Miracle of Forgiveness wasn't exactly encouraging to be open and having good, honest discussions. Let's just say that.
How did you process some of that stuff? How did you manage that? Because some of that stuff we don't teach anymore that's written there.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for that. I think part of it was I was sort of shielded from it. I didn't experience the full brunt of that until after I was in a really stable place, much older. As a youth, I just sort of felt that I was broken and wrong, and I knew for sure I was not going to heaven because, and this is my internalization, the atonement was there to erase sin and wipe away sin. I didn't have any sin that I needed to really confess, and as I prayed for help with stuff, I was still gay. The minor things that I would do, I would confess to church leaders and be forgiven, and then I was still gay.
Wow.
And I couldn't go to heaven if I was gay, and so therefore I was out of reach of the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Why, if I could have had your 18-year-old self on right now and asked that question, why, Jeff, are you not going to heaven because you're gay? What would you have said?
The 18-year-old version would have said, no unclean thing can enter in the kingdom of God, and a gay person is inherently unclean.
Wow.
And it created a lot of shame.
Even though there's no sin involved, it's just being an orientation to gay created that feeling for you. There's no space for me in heaven.
Correct. And the atonement was not taking it away despite all of my best efforts to have it removed. And I will say that this was one of the harmful things about keeping everything inside, because this is all of my own workings. I didn't talk this out with a bishop who said, oh yeah, you're definitely going to hell for this. Like, there was no one to kind of confirm my beliefs, because of course they would not have been confirmed largely. And I was left to my own kind of devise, my own making. Well, some people like cigarette smoke and some people don't, and just don't smoke, or I think a lot of times, and this comes from Miracle of Forgiveness, the comparison to like alcoholism, right? Which is a terrible comparison.
Why is that a terrible comparison?
Well, because I think it kind of it doesn't feel the weight of the experience. I mean, of having an addiction. Again, it's kind of a thing that you have, but not a thing that you are. Because on a fundamental level, we as humans are connected to each other. We need to form attachments. That's how we survive. That's how we really thrive as a species, is when we're connected. And the more connected we are, the better off we are, right? And so sexuality becomes a way that we connect to other people. It's how we kind of seek out connection. So I think it's a more fundamental identification than and people who experience addiction, especially alcoholism, they will say, I am an alcoholic, and it becomes part of their identity. So I don't want to like minimize that experience, but I feel like there isn't really a good metaphor there.
I like what you said. I wrote it down. Things you have are things of the world, like potentially a challenge with alcohol or pornography or whatever. Things you are aren't things of the world and don't need to change and don't need to be fixed. So having a sexual orientation of LGBTQ to me is something you are. And you know this, it is not a mistake. It's not something that's gone awry. It's somehow part of God's plan. And to be compared with, I certainly have picked that up a lot, is that comparison. And I realize after listening to so many how that's a very difficult comparison, to be who you are inside to be compared to things you have.
Well, and the comparisons often come from other people. So as I talk to people about my experience, a church leader will try to find empathy with me, but give me a metaphor like that tells me, okay, you're trying to tell me what it's like, but it's, or they might, say things like, well, I'm a straight man, but I'm still attracted to other women, and I have to say no to that. It's kind of the same thing. I'm like, okay, we're not hearing each other very well right now.
And why isn't that a helpful thing?
Because I think for me to overcome that internalized shame that I developed, and I developed it, but I was given a lot of help from society. So
right.
I don't put the whole burden on me. I had lots of help from others, but to kind of overcome that burden of shame was I had to bring to light the thing that it was and let people know what it was and to be heard and to dispel the myth that my social connectedness was a house of cards built on lies. And once I was able to say what I was and be heard about that and not being told what it was like, but to be able to explain what it was like, and people still stuck around, the myth of my life being a house of cards was dissipated, and
it's very helpful.
It became more concrete.
And if a straight man says, I have feelings towards, I look twice or I look once when a beautiful woman comes by, and I obviously learned not to act on it. There's really no shame in saying that out loud at church, or
no.
We just recognize that. But for a gay man to say the same thing, I look, then there potentially is tremendous shame.
Yeah, and people are uncomfortable. They don't want to hear about that.
That's probably true.
I found that out.
It's also important to know that men need relationships with other men, women need relationships with other women. Whereas a married man doesn't need a lot of relationships with other women, social relationships. And so a gay man needs to build those relationships. So it's not the same thing comparing, I looked at that woman twice. Because they still require those relationships in their lives of men with other men, just like I do with other women.
That's very helpful, Sarah. I have a bunch of prospective missionaries that interact with me on social media that are gay and wondering if they can serve a mission. And I think obviously, everybody's got to, what advice would you have for them?
Honestly, the qualifications to serve a mission, go back to DNC4 and look for the stuff that's there, the people who are called to the work. First of all, sexual orientation is nowhere to be found in DNC4. If you have desires, if you have a testimony, if you want to do this, and go do it. What I have talked with a lot of people, and this is my experience as well, I felt so connected to men on my mission. When I was paired up with a man and we were living together and sharing intimate things together, because I think one's testimony on that spiritual level is about as intimate as people can get, spiritual connectedness. I experienced connectedness and belonging, and whether it was a blessing from God or just the fact that I was getting my social needs met, my attractions weren't that prominent on my mission.
So when you talk about connection and intimacy, I think our listeners know that's not, physical intimacy. It's spiritual intimacy, to use your words, and intimacy in the connection that you're connected in a higher cause,
right,
to bring people unto Christ and to our church.
Yeah. So for a lot of us that are gay or same-sex attracted, it comes down to this need for connection. A lot of the connections that for me weren't present growing up, and they were very insecurely attached as an adolescent. But when you're living with someone and really you know the person very well, you're with someone for a couple months at a time, and it's not just you, it's the other two missionaries that are working your area also, that you and there's a brotherhood, and we rely on each other because we don't have our parents or cousins or siblings. So all of our connectedness comes from the brotherhood of missionary work. And I would include sisters as well. I loved my sister missionaries, and that was always easy. But for the first time in my life, I was connecting to the brothers, and I felt part of the brotherhood. I felt accepted as I was given leadership opportunities. I felt accepted by the mission president, so resolving daddy issues, I suppose. But I felt accepted by the man who was running the thing that I was now a part of, and it was such a wonderful place to feel that belongingness that I'd missed out on so much.
That's really helpful. So it sounds like this was a great time in your life.
Absolutely.
And that's, as I've listened to so many that have served missions, that's the general conclusion I hear. And most of the time they don't come out to companions. They, a few do, but most just are caught up in this brotherhood, to use your word, and this common cause. And it's a really wonderful time.
Yeah.
So we're going to bring Sarah into the equation here. Let's talk about you two meeting each other at BYU. And then at some point, I don't know if it was before you got married or after you got married, you learning that Jeff's gay.
We met as sophomores at BYU, and we were best friends for about 2 years. We did everything together. We had tons of classes together. We ran in the same circles. We spent a lot of time together. And through a process of the 2 years, we got married. And about 6 months after we got married, Jeff told me at that point that he was gay. It was one of those things that I would have never guessed. But when he told me, I was like, oh, yeah, I could see that. And we were lying in bed one night, and his heart started to race, and I was like, what is going on? And he said, oh, I have something to tell you. And he said, in lots of terms, it took forever. He said, I'm gay. And essentially it was, well, why are you telling me this now? What do you mean by it? Or do you want to leave me? Why, what's happening? And he said, no, but I want you to know that you can leave me. And I love Jeff for Jeff. I don't love him because he's straight. I don't love him because of any other reason. I love him because he's generous and kind and the many things that he is. And I said, well, we're committed, right? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I won't leave you. I love you. I want to be with you. So we recommitted that night, and with a better understanding of each other. And it's been 21 years now. This last summer was 21 years. And the process over these 21 years of him accepting who he is and all of the little aspects that come with it. And I think we all have that kind of process. Just seems a little bit bigger because it's not as socially accepted. That his confidence, his joy in being able to say who he is to anyone is wonderful. I love that light in him when he can bear his testimony and be gay at the same time.
That's cool. Thank you, Sarah. Tell us more of the story, Jeff.
Yeah, so it was, again, a time where there wasn't much being said. We heard whisperings of we'll just get married, but I never told a church leader that I was gay, so I was never counseled to get married or not. And I'll say that because it was important for me to follow my own personal inspiration in this matter and not be pressured. I can't say I wasn't pressured because, of course, the culture and the doctrine pressure you to live a certain life. But with Sarah, I knew I loved her deeply as a friend. But I had lots of friends before that I tried dating, and that only survives for so long if the romantic spark is not there. each of my relationships had died. And because of what I felt for Sarah was so deep, I didn't want to hurt her in this way. And I will say I was terribly afraid to tell her before we were married. And I had the thought I need to tell this. I need to say it out loud, but I hadn't said it out loud yet to anybody. And I didn't know how, but I did in my mind think, well, if I get married, then all this will go away. I will have made all the ultimate covenants with God, and therefore at this point it'll be gone. So I kind of held that belief a little bit, again, not because I was told this, but just sort of my own personal belief. So getting married felt like, okay, I know I love her. There was a moment when we weren't dating or anything, but we were just in the library doing our studying, and I saw her as a beautiful woman, and I felt attracted to her. And I believe that was a really beautiful moment, a real wonderful gift. And then I had to decide, well, do I marry her or do we date? Like, how do I do this now? Because I was given the attraction, I felt it, and I hadn't had it before that really. And now I see her as a beautiful woman, as a sexual person, and I felt attracted to her. And so asking her, maybe we should start dating. Let's try this out. Right. And of course, trying that out, we knew that we'd get married right away because we knew each other so well. We had been together for so long. Our friends don't really know this, but we were making marital plans within the first weekend that we started officially dating.
That's cool.
So we just didn't tell them we were engaged until a few months later because we didn't want to be that couple at BYU. Right.
That's cool.
And of course, nobody was surprised. It felt like everyone thought, oh, I thought you already were dating, was kind of the response. It was very natural, very easy. And getting married and moving in together just felt like it was the right thing. And again, I received a number of spiritual confirmations about the way that I was going, that I knew that this was on a spiritual level, the path that would lead me to happiness, which again contradicted what the physical side was.
I love one of the things you said there. Well, a lot of that, but this idea of why you didn't talk to Sarah about you being gay, and because this belief, this feeling that once we got married and we're part of that covenant, that this would finally sort of close this chapter in your life, and so there's no real reason to talk to anybody about that because it was going to end.
Right.
And so I get that connects a lot of dots for me, and maybe for our listeners why you didn't. Yeah. And it sounds like, so what kind of caused you then to, okay, I need to talk to Sarah about this?
Well, it was so after we were married, and I will say that sexually things worked just fine. Like, we were able to have sex. We had a pretty healthy sexual relationship. We've always had a healthy sexual relationship. However, when I opened the box of Jeff's sexuality to allow me to start having sex, having abstained until that moment, everything came out with it. Right. So my attractions to men kind of exploded as well.
It's interesting.
And I was trying to kind of manage that privately, quietly. I didn't want to burden Sarah. I didn't want to freak her out. Again, I thought, I can do this. I can handle it, Jeff. You're competent. You're strong. You're smart. You're whatever. And then after 6 months, I'm like, with it not going away, we didn't have children yet. We were both students. We were poor. There wasn't property or houses. I thought, well, I need to tell her now in case she needs to leave, what we're kind of dealing with, because this isn't going away on its own.
That's a sign of strength and a sign of, I admire you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. I wish I had told her before, but I think it worked out well. And after I told her, we kept it to ourselves for a couple of years.
What did Sarah say that was helpful during that time? I assume there were multiple things, but what kind of helped the most?
Well, in that moment of telling her this, and again, this is the person that matters most in my life, and at that point had already mattered for quite a while, the most to me. So telling her was the biggest fear. If this person rejects me, then that would have been so despairing. And telling her, and we were kind of cuddling in bed, and she pulled me in tighter.
She pulled you in tighter.
And that meant so much to me. And the fact that she was willing to kind of talk about it. And it was hard at first, I'm not going to lie. I was, because I've been thinking about it for so many years, I kind of had to wait for her to catch up a little bit to the idea that I'm gay. But just again, the openness that we could talk about it, and kind of a process. So by the time we were telling any friends or family, we had been having private conversations for a couple of years. The reason why I say that is that, talking with a lot of couples now whose husbands or wives have just come out of the closet and they're in that period of turmoil, they want to get to where we're at right now, 21 years later. I keep saying, just have patience.
Interesting.
Just, this takes time. But it was really Sarah's openness and willingness to work through whatever we had to work through to stay married.
Did you think she'd leave you? If you could go back to your 24-year-old self, wherever you did, if I could talk to you that night, you told her, do you think she'd leave you?
I had played that out in my mind. I think I definitely played that out. How would that look? We were still in the same major. We had all the same friends. What would that look like? And I'd kind of worked through all that, and I think I'd realized that it would be horrible, but that would be the inevitable answer, and we'd probably both get on with our lives. And I think that's important to kind of recognize. So the choice wasn't not to have a choice, but I did have a choice, and we had the choice at the time to separate, and we chose not to. That was a deliberate decision on our part. And then to have a child a year later was a deliberate decision on our part, to stay committed and to again, the choices that could have been made in that moment, the separation or staying together, were both viable options, and therefore we had real agency.
How long did this period of time, if there was any period of time where you both wondered if the marriage would end, and you both concluded that no, this marriage isn't ending, this doesn't change our marriage, we're going to stay married?
I don't ever remember thinking that. I don't ever remember thinking that.
So it was like
there
0
was a
seconds.
Big possibility of us breaking up. He was committed, and he expressed to me that he was committed. He did downplay a lot that night when he told me. It was, it's not that big of a deal. I've got it under control. There's this, there's that. And he downplayed it a lot that night. But I can understand that when we lay everything out in front of someone that, and are so vulnerable, you downplay how severe things are and how real things are. And it took us a couple years to be able to talk and joke about it. I hated joking about it in the first few years. We would make, little snide comments here and there. And I'm like, nope, that's enough. And now my whole family, my teenagers, and we all make gay jokes for Dad. But it's all a part of our personality as a family, though. It took a long time for us to be able to joke about it and this quiet within our home process that happened. But I never felt like we were on the verge of breaking up ever, honestly.
Yeah, that was not really conscious to me as well.
I think a part of that, though, is that we were best friends for 2 years. We didn't date for 2 years. We were best friends for 2 years, and we hung out and we supported each other. And he came to California, and I met his whole family, and he met my whole family, and just as friends, as before we got married. And so I think being friends, because neither one of us wanted to lose our best friend either.
Yeah, and I think having within each relationship, no matter what, mixed, I hate the term mixed orientation. It works, it's the right term, but whatever. But every marriage has to have a couple of different factors. It has to have that commitment. And it's not just a commitment, meaning we have a ring and we did a ceremony. It's an attitude of commitment. I turn towards my wife. She turns towards me as our primary support. I'm committed to her happiness, and she's committed to mine. There has to be, on the other side of this triangle, it's a 3-part thing, what we call intimacy. And intimacy has to do with connectedness, spiritual connectedness, academic connectedness. Can we talk about like politics at the same level of understanding, right? All these levels of connectedness that really make us close friends, and physical intimacy is part of that, but that really loads more on the third category, which is the romance part. That defines what makes a marriage or a romantic pairing different than just being best friends, right? And within every relationship, and I do a lot of couples work, one of those sides of the triangle is suffering or broken, or maybe multiple. So for me, I definitely had to work on the romance part. First of all, I've learned that a lot of straight guys really suck at romance too. So it's not just about me being gay.
That's true.
So I've had to work on the romance, but the physical intimacy, the sexual part, that part did not necessarily come naturally to me. But that was the kind of the part that I had to work at, but it wasn't like I suffered by working at it.
You're a 23-year-old man, so
Right.
23-year-old men don't have too big of issues with that.
Right. So, and I think like just a willingness to kind of experience something different than what maybe I was naturally drawn to.
We go through those 3 corners again. I think that's helpful for every relationship.
Yeah. So it's commitment, that sense of committed, the intimacy, how close you feel. You hear spouses say all the time, my husband or my wife is my best friend. And I think that's really healthy.
And intimacy is broader than just physical intimacy. I like the
Right.
way you talked about examples of intimacy that weren't physical.
Right. It's the idea that I am known and I know you. It's really being known and connected. When Sarah's mad at me, she walks about 1/8 of an inch in front of me, and no one can see that. There's no perception of it, but I know that we're not exactly lined up because I know her, and I usually know why she's mad at me. You know, that's intimacy when you don't have to ask what's wrong. I got a pretty good idea of what's wrong. And so it's that connectedness that really defines intimacy.
And was there a third one?
The third part was romance.
Romance.
So the romantic sexual aspect of that relationship.
And that's even
understanding-
broader than physical intimacy. That's
Absolutely.
courting and flowers and
Right.
I don't know,
Meeting each
cards.
other's needs.
Meeting each other's
Right.
needs, Sarah.
So the good metaphor for that is like the book that talks about the love languages. Like, what is it that you value to show love? I need physical touch. Sarah loves gifts and quality time. Meeting each other's romantic needs for that sense that I am this person's most important person, and my love needs are being met.
Gifts, quality time. This person needs to know they're the most important person in my life.
Yeah.
I assume that this period of time stretched your marriage and actually gave you foundation principles that strengthen your marriage long term. And I would guess that as you counsel other couples, you recognize that the process you went through has given you a foundation that some couples never develop, and is a beautiful part of your story is this period of time figuring this out.
Yeah, and I think that's where when we've had struggles with especially with my sexuality, because it does come up. It's not, again, this thing is not solved, but being able to know that she is my best friend, and to kind of rely on that friendship when other parts there may be some struggle.
Any more thoughts from you, Sarah, on walking this road? We'll talk.
The part that it's not about you
Oh,
as a woman.
when we first got married, we actually had a few other couples that we knew that were in mixed orientation marriages or relationships. And they kept coming to me and asking me, you guys seem all right. What's happening? Why are you guys okay? And early on, I realized that my value as a woman had nothing to do with Jeff. It had nothing to do with how he felt about me. That it was all, my divine nature, my gift of womanhood from God is all inherent within me, and it was not connected. Him having a different type of attraction to me, I would suppose, did not make me less attractive, less valuable. It did not change my worth. And I had to realize that early on. I know there are a lot of women out there that hang their value on how other people see them. There are a lot of men out there that hang their value on how other people see them. And I was just faced with it very, very quickly in our marriage, that because he's attracted to men doesn't make me less of a woman. And that helped me help him better, to love him more.
How did you do that?
I think it was a process. I think it was mean, I'm I'm a pretty outspoken person. I'm a pretty strong personality. Um, and when I did start feeling, well, he married me because maybe I'm a little bit, my shoulders are broader or whatever. And I was like, no. And it was a self-talk of that's not it. There's no way, and I would have to self-talk myself until I believed it. Honestly, I prayed about it. I talked about it with Jeff, and finally, after a little bit of a process, realized that it's true, that it's real, that I am who I am because of what God has given me, not because of the effect of anyone else on me.
I love where you are, and I think everybody should be where you are, men or women. And I have to think part of that's your relationship with God and a foundation on Christ and creating self worth around things that you can totally control versus outside influences. And culturally, that's hard to do sometimes. And I think it's harder for women than men sometimes culturally because of the expectations. But I love where you are.
Thank
and
you.
I think that's a great example for all of us.
Thanks.
I know in our singles ward, this is a tangent. Maybe it's because, I was just sensitive to, because I got married at 28 and married a 28-year-old. And I was particularly sensitive to all the good women I was dating that, were great. And I realized some were not getting married. But when we then were called to serve in a singles ward, we didn't want to make the culture about getting married. We wanted people to feel complete unmarried, especially women, because I sensed that as they got in their later 20s, that was very difficult. And the reality that may not be happening. And I just felt like God wanted people to feel complete and whole. Yeah, I love marriage, and it's helped me accomplish things in my life together we'd never accomplish individually. But I still wanted people to feel whole and complete before marriage.
Yeah, if you feel like your spouse is necessary for you to feel like a whole person, then the things that you will do and the way that you try to draw them in, the stuff that you're willing to put up with can become really toxic if that spouse is not a good person. And this is where we get into situations where people stay in marriages that are really toxic and unhealthy because the person feels like, I can't let this person go because of I'm not okay by myself. And I think I'm going to quote RuPaul here.
Good.
Because she's one of my favorite heroes. If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anybody else?
That's great, Jeff.
Right. So you've got to have that self-love to be in a healthy relationship.
So I don't know if you feel like you went through phases. I'm going to call phase 1 the coming out phase in your marriage, and I'm going to call that a success. And I love the part of this story that I love the most is you cuddling closer to Jeff. And that wasn't anything you said, but it sounds like something he will never forget, Sarah, is when he came out to you, you moved in. And I'd say you hit a home run. And it sounded like it meant a lot to Jeff. And I would say, phase 2 is this 2-year period where you're working this out, not telling anybody. And then it sounds like you started to tell people. So talk about that. I'm going to call that the phase 3 stage.
Okay, phase 3.
This is my analytical mind,
Well, again, so at that time, there didn't seem to be a way to talk about this. I will say I was a music major and I lived in the Harris Fine Arts Center at BYU. And for a lot of years, believed I was the only gay kid on campus, which we all laugh at now. Come on.
There's a lot of gay BYU students these days.
I know, and not just in the fine arts building, but that's where a lot of them coalesce. So there wasn't much of a discussion. There was no place to talk to. And again, I still had a bit of that fear of the House of Cards. Sarah accepting me and drawing me in closer was really important to kind of solidify that. But I still had to deal with the idea that I had friends that I was pretty sure would reject me if they found out. So the first time that I ever spoke about it outside of just me and Sarah was with some friends and 2 female friends, and one of them was dating a man who identified as gay, and just kind of saying, I wish he had an example of someone that could show him that like marrying me would work somehow. That was kind of the discussion, and me finally saying, well, maybe he could come talk to me because I'm gay. And they knew,
Wow.
They knew me, they knew Sarah. We were all tight friends in the music department, and That was the first time I kind of did it. And then having that discussion with him the first time, I was so awkward. It took us a while to kind of say the thing that we knew that we were supposed to talk about. But by saying it out loud and then looking left and looking right and noticing that my house was still standing, okay, this is okay. And then I did talk with a therapist for about a semester, actually at the request of this friend who had said he'd been seeing a therapist and how helpful it was. I'm like, oh, you can do therapy for this? And I went to a therapist and I was expecting to be told how to be straight. So, but that was this therapist. He's a wonderful man. He was like, no, we're going to work on acceptance and self-love and all these things. And
acceptance and self-love.
Yeah. And that was a far more critical clinical issue, was acceptance and self-love. And so as he and I talked, and he encouraged me to test the waters, what would happen if people knew? Would they really fall to the left or to the right? And so, starting with my parents, let's try this out and see what happens. And of course, we love you, Jeff, and all the right things were said. Okay. And then Sarah and I talked once about, well, let's just tell our favorite people. So she had a best friend, female. I had a male best friend. They were both straight. And let's try this one out. And so we each told our person. And that went wonderfully. It went beautifully. And so we started kind of talking, and then Sarah's family, and then my siblings, and okay. And then all of a sudden we found ways to kind of communicate. And by doing that, all the myths of rejection were being shattered, one by one, until I realized I'm okay. And this isn't a thing that I have to fix in order to be accepted and loved, that I can be accepted and loved regardless of the status of my sexuality.
I love that story. Anything to add to that? I'm looking for a quote that I read like every podcast. Sorry, listeners, you keep hearing the same quote, but I'm going to read it again because Jeff just talked about it. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted, which you've spent a lifetime doing. Belonging, on the other hand, which is so much emotionally healthier place to be, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are.
That's right.
So powerful quote, and you're personalizing that with your own life. This is phase 3, kind of. I'm labeling your life. That's probably not fair, and just phases.
Well, phase 3 also saw me talking within the community of Latter-day Saints who identified as gay or same-sex attracted. So going to an early support group of a group called Evergreen that existed a long time ago. I met some really wonderful people there. I didn't like the messaging very well. It didn't resonate with me.
Help our listeners know not that we want to, I think it's just helpful to know, if I'm trying to do a good job, what messaging would I communicate that would actually add to your load? So help us understand that.
So my perception was at the time, and this was, I don't know, we want to get into a bigger discussion about conversion therapy and reparative therapy, but there was this notion, and it's very old, it's actually very Freudian, that if we repair these relationships with our male people, with our fathers, as Freud would say, or with the disconnect, then our sexuality could diminish and even change. Right. And that was the presumption. So I read all the books. I read the original ideas. There was a book published in, I believe, the 1950s that started talking about fixing this, because at the time, of course, homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder. So looking at kind of how to repair, and I felt like, okay, I've got to repair this, and then the attractions will diminish or go away. That was the problem. So I did the repair work. I have a wonderful father whom I love. I identify a lot with my mom for similar interests, but my dad has been a steady, loving person my whole life. And I made sure that I improved that relationship. A lot of times when I would call home, if my dad picked up the phone, he'd say, okay, good to hear you. Here's your mother, And so I made a point to talk to him more and ask him about his life and connect. And then I made sure that with my other male relationships, I was better connected. And so I did all these things, but then I was still gay.
Interesting.
And I'm grateful that I was able to do the things that have me connect better and feel comfortable and confident in the world of masculinity. And I really tested that when I went into the Army. Like, can I be accepted by this population? And having a wonderful experience, and felt absolutely connected, absolutely part of the team, was really affirming to me, and I was still gay. So the problem with the old way of thinking was that the outcome was not what they were saying the outcome would be.
And then you could self-internalize and say, well, I haven't done this right, or
Right.
I need to do more of this, or it's back on you to be not gay.
Right. Right.
It's helpful.
So having kind of done that work a little bit, I didn't find much of a need for Evergreen. I kind of would say to people, this is a program that you're supposed to graduate from. We don't graduate from the need for the connectedness, but I kind of distanced myself. And again, I didn't like the anxiety that I felt when I was there and the pressure to change my orientation. So I kind of distanced myself, but I still kept in touch with the friends from that were healthy to me and built me up.
And I assume at this point, people are reaching out to you that are gay, lesbian, trans, and saying, I need help in this space.
A little bit because of just the personal connection. So Sarah and I didn't share our story publicly really until 2014. So it wasn't until very recently that we got kind of a broader outreach that way. But certainly in that time period, or in the early 2000s, people would say, hey, could you talk to my friend, my brother, my cousin, or whatever? And so Sarah and I would kind of meet with people and talk with them and describe how our marriage works, what makes us healthy, and the idea that we can be happy and fulfilled.
Talk about North Star, because when I connected to this world, I'd heard negative things, some negative things about North Star. Then in the last year, I've tried to do my own due diligence on North Star. Now I realize I'm very supportive of North Star and its mission and what it's trying to accomplish. And I realize it has kept some of the perceptions. I'm kind of a marketing guy, like to see brands be able to change. And I recognize its brand is influenced by some of the stuff that happened under the Evergreen umbrella. So just talk to our listeners about North Star, its purpose, and what they're trying to accomplish and why they can be helpful.
So I think
And
North
Sarah,
Star.
you're welcome to jump in on this too.
Yeah, and Sarah has come with me to a number of things, and she's kind of seen the community. Again, Evergreen, I kept her out of it.
Evergreen, it was quiet. It was hidden. It was
Sounds
almost
shaming.
shameful. Yeah.
And so I never felt comfortable with Sarah even meeting the people, and they weren't comfortable in their own skin. They didn't want to meet people either. They didn't want to meet my wife.
You weren't supposed to tell anyone where the meeting was held, when the meeting was held, who was there. It was quiet.
It feels shaming.
It felt like kind of an addiction recovery meeting.
Interesting.
Except more private, right? More confidential. So I first heard of North Star actually through the book that Ty Mansfield published, Voices of Hope. And I read a different narrative. And I was kind of curious. It kind of piqued my curiosity. So I reached out to Ty. He and I are both living in Texas. We had a meal. I'm like, okay, this feels a little bit different, a little bit healthier. I came to the first North Star conference that was held in 2014, and the messaging was different. It wasn't about efforts to change sexual orientation. It was about understanding who you are as a child of God. What does this mean? And I think I've told you before, I'm kind of an existentialist. And so I want to know the meaning of things. Why is this happening? What is this for? The years of asking God to take away my sexual orientation and change it somehow never produced fruit. The question I started asking myself was, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this? And once I started asking that question,
that's a big difference.
Well,
exactly
and finally
right.
being able to say out loud, God gave this to me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't some thing that happened. God gave this to me as a blessing.
That's
How
cool.
do I use it?
Yeah, so what am I supposed to do? Because I fully am committed to the doctrine of Jesus Christ. It resonates with me. The restored gospel found in temple work. The temple is my happy place on the planet, and I can't shake that. I can't shake how I feel when I read the Book of Mormon. I know it's scripture. So knowing all that and having that spiritual sense, I've got this physical body that's demanding something different than what my spiritual sense is telling me. How do you reconcile that? So at first it was get rid of that, get rid of the physical thing. And that didn't work because God gave this to me. Recognizing that God gave it to me, I'm like, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this? And then my world opened up. Then I started paying attention to the covenant that I made about consecration, right? Sarah and I had figured out how to have a healthy, happy, mutually fulfilling relationship that the world would say, just wait. Sarah was even told early on, oh, he's going to cheat on you. It's all going to fall apart and you're going to end in sadness. And we weren't ending in sadness. We were still really happy. So how do we consecrate our experience? And that's what we found with North Star, people that are willing to say what's happening with them. And it doesn't have to always be great. It could be difficulty, but we're going to consecrate all the parts of the experience for the purpose of building up God's kingdom and building up his children, really to move towards a healthier place.
That's really healthy. So I'm going to call this stage 4 is when you're out publicly.
Okay.
And the very first thing you did publicly was the North Star Voices of Hope, or were there other things? And help our listeners, I think you're speaking in church. You've done a podcast with leading LDS Kurt Frankham, and you're just being asked to talk about this subject more and more.
So that process was definitely difficult. At the time that I was having these thoughts, I was still an active duty officer in the Army. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell hadn't been repealed yet. So
wow.
I'm like, okay, so I'm in the temple thinking about consecration, thinking about this, knowing what I need to say and how I need to say it, knowing that it's not me. Sarah and I need to have a voice together. So I can't just burst out of the closet and leave her like, wait, where am I at? Like, she had to be with me side by side because it was our process and our journey that needed to be consecrated. And so that was a real struggle. And I saw the words in the temple that I needed to say. It was very clear to me in those moments. So then the how came into play. And so Ty Mansfield reached out, hey, you should do a video. And we're like, we're not doing a video. We're not going to talk publicly. And he's like, well, just maybe write an essay. And I'm like, okay. So I started to write this thing out and the words didn't come. About a year and plus, I had this open Word file on my laptop perpetually, and the words didn't come until one day they came.
Wow.
And right then I was leaving the Army
Wow.
to go live in the civilian world and work with veterans. And it just came. And Sarah was like, Jeff, I think it's time. We need to put this out there. I'm like, okay. So she became ready as well, which was an important thing because now Sarah's in the spotlight. What are you doing married to a gay man? And that's going to make her ask and be asked really uncomfortable questions. And so we were at that point unified. And so at first we thought, well, we'll just put this out on the Voices of Hope website. And so I submitted the essay. Sarah liked it. We talked to our kids about it at that point too. That way they didn't get, they were 12 and 14 at the time, the two older ones. And so, and we said, let's move forward with this. And it was published on the website. And then as it was published on the website, it was also tagged on Facebook. And so Ty said, hey, it's going live today. I'm like, great, put it on the website. Fantastic. No one will ever find it.
Then you got tagged on your own feeds.
And I forgot that there was a Voices of Hope Facebook page. And it was published there. And Jeff and Sarah Case tell their story and our names were on there. And I was in a therapy session and my phone was in my pocket and I was going bananas. And so I quickly called Sarah at work. I'm like, we just got tagged on Facebook. And she's like, well, let's just go with it.
Yeah, we had like 30 seconds. We're like, pull it, go with it. Yeah, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Who cares? Who knows? It's going to help somebody.
It's going to help somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. When you speak in church, when you're invited to speak, give us an idea of some of the things you try to communicate.
Well, we try to communicate kind of our experience, and we make sure that we talk about the fact that this is our experience that was given to us through personal revelation, that we are not imposing our experience on anyone else, that people need to have their agency expanded to find the path that works for them, and this is the path that works for us.
I was asked a couple days ago what advice I would have for other people looking at mixed orientation marriage, and I said, I don't have any. I don't know your situation. I don't know your marriage. I don't know your life. I don't know anything about you. I don't know that this would work. It's all individualized. This will not work for some people. It's working wonderfully for us, but it will not work for everyone.
Which I think is important because I don't want to put the message out there that people should get married. or even, I think the message I want to tell people is you've got to find your inspiration. You've got to find your personal revelation for how your life should live. I think God puts people in different environments for the sake of that. I think I was at a meeting in Provo at the Provo City Library, and there were 3 people on the panel. Ty Mansfield in the mixed orientation marriage, headlining in North Star. Tom Christofferson was there with his unique story, and John Gustav Rathall was there as well.
I saw that.
Who is married to his husband, and they've been together for since I think the late 80s. They've been together for a long time. And they are each planted in the place where they're planted kind of intentionally, because they're going to each reach different members of our Heavenly Father's flock. And so we all have to kind of figure out where our place is and how we're going to live our lives in a way that will reach the people that are around us.
What advice do you have for a young LGBTQ person who feels like they just can't do a mixed orientation marriage and they just can't be celibate? They're kind of graduating from BYU, and now they've been living the honor code. They're kind of in this window now that they could pursue a same-sex relationship, or, and I've done a couple podcasts with people in this space, and I kind of want them to stay, but I kind of recognize this is really hard. And so it's complicated for me. And it's complicated for parents if they see their own children stepping away and kind of going down the road of a same-sex relationship.
I think, again, I'm going to go back to my existential roots. Put aside whatever shame you're feeling, whatever public pressure you're feeling. Lay these things aside and figure out what's going to work for you, what's going to draw you towards growth and the meaning of what you have. So looking at finding meaning in your journey, in your process. And sometimes your process leads you to strange places that you could not have predicted, right? A person's process is so individual. I would have never predicted that I would be in the Army. I was laying in a bunk once in Iraq, and I'm thinking, how in the world did I get to this place where I'm in a metal box on a cot in Baghdad, right? So be willing to kind of see where the growth opportunities are. And if you can kind of depart from your shame, from your angst, and really know that you can grow in a lot of different ways, you're going to find the ways that will work best for you. And no one can really tell you what your path is. That is between you and your Heavenly Father. The people that I know that have started pursuing same-sex relationships, I love when people tell me that they prayed and that this is the path that they're taking at this time, and they do feel divine inspiration on that. And there are some who would say, well, God would never tell you to engage in sinful behavior. And I'm like, well, I don't know. What if we're allowed to have experiences as mortals that is meant to teach us, to help us have better empathy and growth, right? And so what is this? What is it that I'm to do with the thing that I've been given? Ask yourself that question. Ask that question of your God, your belief system. What am I to do? And I think you're going to find answers.
I like that. Any comments on that, Sarah?
Be true to who you are. It's all the relationship between you and your Heavenly Father.
Now, you'd mentioned parents before, and I think that's the other part that Sarah and I talk about when we do go talk with wards and people. Parents who cannot let their children act on their agency will lose their children. If the ones that are like that demand acceptance or fealty to the gospel, in a really controlling way, those kids are going to be gone.
One of the big things that we talk about is unconditional love. That we do talk about our story, but that you have to have a place for them to want to come back to. You have to have a place where they're accepted and feel loved. There are so many stories out there that you have to have a place where you're going to feel the Spirit. If you feel defensive and judged when you go into your parents' house, you're not going to feel the Spirit while you're in there. As a parent, you need to provide a place that your child will feel the Spirit, and then possibly have that opportunity to return when they're ready. But if they don't ever feel the Spirit, if they don't ever feel that love, and they don't have a place to feel that, they won't return. They won't return because of you. They won't return because of what you have provided for them and offered them. And so we talk about unconditional love a lot.
What do you do when parents say, well, my responsibility is to teach the church and stand up for the doctrine of our church, and if I keep kids in my lot and I can't do that, if my kids step away, then it seems like my job is to continue to teach them the doctrine of the church, even if it means that they won't, it sort of separates them from the family.
It's so important to remember that you did teach them. When you ask them what the word of wisdom is, they know. They know these things. You taught them, you raised them in a home with love and expectations and the gospel. They know. You reiterating those things and pounding that into them is not going to help anybody. They know those things that you taught and that you live in your own life, that you are an example of. Just beating that into them is not going to help anything.
Let me tell a story about that, because I had a friend of mine come to me. I was an early morning seminary teacher for a few years in Texas, and one of the kids.
Thanks for your service. That's a hard assignment.
It was hard and
did
wonderful.
That for 1 month.
Did you? It was one of my favorite callings I've ever had in the church. But one of the dads came and said, my son, after he graduated, moved in with his girlfriend, and is not really coming to church anymore. How often should I be preaching to him the law of chastity? And I said, well, doesn't he know it? Well, of course, I taught him everything. I said, okay, well, then he already knows it, so stop it.
The answer is never.
Right. The answer is like,
you're done.
You've done that part, so he knows where you stand. You don't have to keep saying it, because every time you do that, you put a wedge between his life and your life, and you put distance between you two. And he said, okay, I get that. So obviously I can't ever have this girlfriend over to our house. And I said, obviously you can't. What? Why obviously? Well, what would that teach my children? And I said, well, perhaps it might teach your children that you love them unconditionally. But if you keep your son's most important person out of your life, you're going to lose your son. And what I remind people is the arc of one's existence is long. Our earthly existence by itself is long. We have a lot of years. Don't panic. And then the arc of our eternal existence is very, very long. Don't panic. If you start panicking and tightening the noose, they will leave. This is from Bennett Borden, who's the current president of North Star. One of the things that he said was, we only have influence on people that we have access to. So if you're preaching of chastity or the word of wisdom creates distance between you and your children because they already know it, and what they're sensing from you is condemnation, then you will no longer have access to that person, and you won't have any ability to influence them either way.
Well, that's worth a whole podcast, what the both of you just said there. I don't have all the answers, but after being a parent for 28 years, that's certainly my experience. And I even tried to do that as a priesthood leader in the YSA assignment, that I wanted to create this feeling that for the YSAs that I would walk with them on any road they choose to walk on. In other words, my role in their life didn't change as they journeyed in and out of the church.
Right.
And I would walk with them. Yeah, their ability to fully participate in the church sometimes changed, and they knew that, and I knew that, but I would just walk with them. And I tried to do that without an ulterior motive. Yeah, right. I kind of wanted them to come back, and some did, because I just kept extending my love and kindness to them. But I felt I was the most aligned with God when it was not even based on an ulterior motive. It was just based on charity and the pure love of Christ for these YSAs, no matter where they were, as far as what we might just see them as their station with the church.
Right. One of my favorite primary songs, I'll Walk With You, kind of emphasizes that I'll walk with you and I'll talk with you, and that's how I will show my love for you. So back to this dad. I said, how much does your son know that you love him? Well, of course he knows. I mean, how wouldn't he know? I'm like, well, what do you do to show him that you love him? Is preaching to him chastity a sign of love, or is that you trying to coerce him back into a lifestyle that you value? From Into the Woods, be careful of the things you say. Children will listen. Careful of the things that you do. Children will see and learn. and they are learning acceptance and love, or they're learning rejection and fear. And that has to be expressed in a way that encourages that acceptance and that love. And then we'll have influence over them in a more deeply positive way than just getting someone to adhere to commandments.
And then we'll have influence over them in a more deeply way versus just getting them to adhere to commandments.
Right. It's easy to get people to do what you want them to do. It's
Especially
much
when they're
harder.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13. But
Right. It's much harder when they have agency, and the gift of agency is divine. We have it for a reason, and it needs to be expanded. The adversary seeks to diminish our agency, and so when we as parents attempt to diminish the agency of our children, then I think we're not in a divine place.
it's powerful. I'm glad you're speaking about this topic a lot, because I think we all need to kind of hear how to navigate this. Talk about your own kids learning to have a gay dad.
But I thought you loved mom.
It was that was a process that we had to rely on inspiration. I tell people, my fear was I don't want to tell my kids to alleviate my pressure. It couldn't be about me. If I make it about me, then I am, as a parent, and becoming emotionally enmeshed in my children, and that's not healthy. So there had to be a good reason and a good way to tell them that was for their edification, for their growth, to increase their empathy towards others. So that's kind of how we approach it. We waited until it was actually interesting. We received the same inspiration on the same day. We're like, I think I know how to tell the kids. And Sarah's like, I think I do too. And we both said how we would do it. And we're like, yeah, okay. We got the same answer to the prayer kind of together. And then sitting down and kind of explaining the process, kind of where we're at, and then encouraging conversation. There wasn't a lot. Again, 12 and 14, they didn't want to talk about dad being gay too much. But what we've noticed since then is how our children have so much empathy and compassion for other people in different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Our 12-year-old daughter's reaction was, but I thought you loved mom. And I'm grateful that she was able to say that out loud, and that we could like quell any misunderstandings real quick.
Well, we could talk about love in that moment. What does
Yeah.
love mean? What does it look like? Teaching our children a healthy understanding of a complete sense of love, instead of the love that they were picking up from television or friends' influence.
Why do you think your son on a mission in Chicago is a more effective missionary because he has a gay dad? That's a leading question, but I believe it's true.
Well, I mean, especially when my kids were really young, I would read their texts and things. He had a friend come out to him over text, and his response was, cool. So anyway, Pokemon this, and like, I mean, he was like, he was empathetic because the kid was saying he was having trouble at school with it. And he was like, that sucks. Those guys are jerks. So in Pokemon, and he just, and he just went on. And I think that has absolutely helped him.
Yeah, and he has reached out. He has said we've come across a few LGBT potential investigators. How do we help them? How do we talk with them? But I think what it's done is, we don't walk a normal path. Our path is somewhat distinct, and yet there's still love. There's still the gospel. These things all still work together just fine. And so I would hope that it would broaden his understanding of who a teaching pool could include. That you knock on someone's door and they say, well, I am a heavy smoker. Okay, we can still talk to you. Let's still have these discussions. Or what if they come across someone who's gay or lesbian or transgender? Great. This gospel really is for everybody.
See, I think if I could do a podcast in 10 years and have your kids on the podcast, or 20 years when they're parents, or 40 years when they're grandparents, and talk about the family lessons that have been learned because of the two of you, and how this is a great blessing to the family. And I would guess your son, when he comes from Chicago, will talk about specific experiences, not just LGBTQ, but his ability to reach more people like you talk, and all your kids. And so to me, what you're doing in your family is aligning your children closer with the gospel of Jesus Christ. and giving him better tools to reach everybody, even from that simple text from your son's friend coming out.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope for the future and sort of honors the courage you have to sort of talk to your kids. So, Jeff, I know you're an adjunct professor at BYU in the psychology department, I believe.
That's correct, yes.
And how often do you teach?
I usually have one class in the fall and one class in the winter semester. So I'm on campus 1 day a week, typically.
And what's the name of the class you like to teach your classes?
One of my favorite classes is abnormal psychology. That's kind of the world that I live in. So I can offer students really a lot of experiential information as well as the academic stuff they get from the textbook.
And do you teach one or two classes?
So I just teach one per semester.
One per
but I've been asked to teach other things as well. So I've taught introduction to psychology, and I've adult development, and a class on clinical psychology specifically.
And I think you come out to your students as a gay faculty member.
That is true. So,
and why do you do that, and how does that received?
So part of it was these topics come up. The LGBT question is one that is being discussed a lot among the generation of college students currently. They're a much more accepting, loving population than I think what I experienced growing up. And so they're having much more open discussions. And I think I want to give them the opportunity to have a discussion from a different perspective, a different vantage point. So it's hard for me to be genuine with the students when they don't know that I'm gay. So we'll be talking about the research, and I'll be alluding quietly. And I'm like, why am I doing this? This isn't a thing I need to be ashamed of anymore. Why am I still afraid to speak the thing that I have? And so I speak it, and we talk about it, and we have fantastic discussions. And these kids respond I shouldn't say kids, these young adults respond so beautifully, so wonderfully. And the discussions are kind of different. And for me, I think had I known of a gay faculty member, that would have been so meaningful for me when I was a student, just to know that I had an ally that I could talk to. There was a professor that I did talk with a little bit, but but again, it was so closeted and quieted that it was helpful for sure. And I'm grateful for that experience. So I want to kind of extend that to other students, because I know that there are students who struggle. And almost every semester I'll get, hey, can we meet during your office hours and just have a discussion? Either a person might be experiencing, they might be gay themselves, or they are dating someone and they're not sure, or there are different things that are happening in their lives, and having someone they can talk to openly, I think is a real blessing for them, and also for me.
I think that's great. I do think of all the BYU LGBTQ kids and what it would mean to have, even if they don't know you, that there's just a professor on campus who's gay and is accepted and teaching and recognized for all the credentials he or she has and their ability to teach the subject and completely belong there in every way.
Yeah, so BYU has had a few events recently where they've had some open discussions and panel discussions. And I know there's at least one person who's on the faculty who does talk. He's also a student, so he's in kind of a dual role. Ben Shalati,
our friend Ben Shalati, yeah,
right? He's fantastic, and so the discussions, when we can put faces to it and humanize it, all of a sudden our discussions are so much more real and so much more powerful.
So thank you for sharing that part, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Talk about how you handle the high-profile mixed orientation marriages that end, and if people then say this is what's going to happen to you, and how you manage that. Because we've done some podcasts with mixed orientation marriages that seem incredibly healthy from my perspective, and I don't worry at all about those marriages. In fact, sometimes I look at the foundation of those marriages and think they're in a healthier spot than a lot of straight marriages that I know.
Mm-hmm. I'll start. They'll grease the wheels. When these high profile mixed orientation marriages end, of course it sends shockwaves and ripples, and we read the stories. Absolutely, we read the stories,
and we address them together. We process them together.
There was one that was high profile. He and his wife both contributed to it, and we read it out loud to each other, and we processed it together. And one thing that on a personal level, we didn't get married because other people were married. So we're not going to get divorced because other people divorce. So
That's powerful.
so we had to kind of, that was part of our discussion. I didn't get married because Josh Weed was married. And I'm not going to divorce because he divorces. Right. So part of the reading it out loud was able to kind of see how we're not in the places that they were at when they made that decision. There are differences in our paths. And if the time ever comes that I become highly suicidal or Sarah becomes highly suicidal or whatever, let's survive divorced than stay married and die. Right.
We will do what's healthiest for us, but
Exactly
again,
right.
It's never been a topic.
That's not ever
our
come up for
family.
us. That's not where we're at. So we see the differences
Good.
in the relationships, and we recognize that.
I think that's true in every single marriage, that you've got to do what's healthy, whether it's a straight, marriage or a gay or mixed. You've got to do what's healthiest for everyone in the marriage, and do what's best.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's the difficulty comes in when people want to say, well, if these marriages failed, there's no mixed orientation marriage that can be healthy. They all are doomed. We'll all end in sadness. And there are people who put that idea forward, and it's really not helpful.
Yeah.
Again, that limits agency.
Yeah.
That takes away people's options for choice.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. So it's disappointing when people want to burn the whole barn down as they walk out of it.
Yeah, I like that, and I think it's a binary way of thinking.
Right.
And I think one of the things you're helping us understand this podcast is really that we don't need to think that way.
Yeah. And so what I would tell people is, like, learn the lessons. Watch your health. Watch yourself. Like if you get to an unhealthy place, address it. And then figure out how to get to a healthy place. And no one will choose that path for you. Even when I do couples work, in my head, I'm like, man, they need to split up. What a horrible marriage, right? Or I may think, you guys are both so wonderful. I love each of you. I want to keep this marriage together at all costs. That's not my place.
It's interesting.
My place is to lay out the relationship in front of them and then allow them to make a healthy decision from a healthy place. So we want that right extended to us as well, that as long as we're healthy and happy, we don't need to be told that our marriage can't work, that it's a sham.
Yeah, and burning down the whole barn in the process is so hurtful. I mean, when we read that article and listened to them just express that there is no way that this can ever work for anyone, we stopped and went, is there no way this can... You know what? It's not true. It's not true at all. And it took, second guessing and this process together that we're like, just because they couldn't make it work, and you read between the lines, I feel like there are other things going on in your marriage that aren't going on in my marriage. I don't burn the whole barn down while we're in this process. It's working for us and we're happy.
And no one tells heterosexual people, well, there are divorces, so no one should get married.
That's powerful.
That's preposterous.
Yeah.
So because love is multidimensional, and for years the LGBT community were saying, let us love how we need to love. Let us be free in how we choose our partners. Let us marry who we want to marry. I just ask for the same privilege to be extended to me. Let me understand my sexuality and let me express it in the way that works best for me, where I'm healthiest and I'm the happiest.
Well, this is just a beautiful love story. As I see the two of you and I see the interaction between the two of you and the love between the two of you and walking this road together, it's a love story. And I am uplifted in my own marriage just listening to you two talk. And I think this is a podcast that helps everybody, no matter where they are, to have wonderful principles to help us in life and honor differences and keep us together. And so any concluding thoughts? We'll let Sarah have the final word here.
That's a good idea.
So Jeff,
well, I was reading in the Book of Mormon recently, and I was reading the accounts of Nephi building a boat. And he was asked to build a boat, and he described it as curious workmanship, not after the understanding of men. And I thought, through inspiration, through divine guidance, Sarah and I have built a marriage that is not after the knowledge of men, that it is of curious workmanship. And it's going to get us across the ocean, right? It's going to get us to the place where eternally we're going to have a divine love. It's not about being in the afterlife still being gay or straight. We're going to have God's complete and total love, and we're going to become like God and have a fully developed love, right? So yes, it's of curious workmanship, but it works.
I love that. That boat is a great boat that represents your marriage.
Thanks.
And it's all about your relationship with your Savior, with your Heavenly Father. Unconditional love with all of those around you your light will shine, your example will shine, and accepting and making choices that are good for you and your family, caring about the well-being of your spouse. I mean, it's all regular marriage stuff is my life. And I know it seems like it's different, but it's all normal marriage things.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff and Sarah Case, for joining us on an episode of Listen, Learn, Love. You are helping so many. Thank you.
Thank you.